All right, everyone, welcome. Today we're diving into something really fascinating in economics, the oligopoly. Those markets where it feels like just a handful of big companies are running the whole show. Now you'd think, right? If there are only a couple of major players, they just team up, keep prices high, and make a ton of money. It seems so simple. But weirdly enough, that's often not what happens. So the big question is, why is it so hard for them to cooperate? Let's get into it. Okay, first things first, let's really break down what an oligopoly is and, more importantly, what it feels like for a company trying to compete in one. Think about it like this. You're not a monopoly where you're the only game in town. And you're definitely not in a perfectly competitive market where you're just a tiny, anonymous face in a massive crowd. No, in an oligopoly, you're in a small room with just a few other major players. Every single move you make, every price change, every decision to produce more is being watched. And you know your rivals are going to react. It is all about strategy. To make this super clear, let's look at the simplest kind of oligopoly, a duopoly. That just means two firms. So let's picture a tiny town, we'll call it Smallville. And in this town, there are only two gas stations, 7-Eleven and Casey's. Now, if these two could just play nice and cooperate perfectly, what we economists call collusion, they could basically act like one giant monopoly. Imagine they meet up and say, hey, let's both agree to limit how much gas we sell and jack up the price to $7 a gallon. If they do that, they'd make a combined profit of $26,400. That's a sweet $13,200 for each of them. For the two of them, that's the dream scenario. But, and this is a huge but, here's where it all gets messy. Even if they shake hands on this perfect plan, there is this powerful, almost irresistible temptation for each of them to secretly break the agreement. So let's play this out. Imagine the manager at Casey's sitting there thinking, you know what if I just pumped a little extra gas? A bit more than the 2,200 gallons we agreed on. 7-Eleven will never know, and I can make some extra cash. So what happens if they give in? Okay, look at these numbers. If Casey's cheats and sells 3,000 gallons, the total amount of gas in town goes up, which forces the price for everyone down to $6. But here's the kicker. Even with that lower price, Casey's profit shoots up to $15,000. And what happens to poor Rule following 7-Eleven? Their profit tanks, all the way down to $11,000. That's the cold hard logic of self-interest at work.
But wait a second. 7-Eleven isn't stupid. They can see this coming. So they're thinking, hey, if Casey's going to cheat, there is no way I'm going to be the sucker. I'm going to cheat too. And if they both cheat, well, the market gets totally flooded, the price crashes even more, and they each end up making only $12,000, which, if you're keeping score, is less than they would have made if they just trusted each other. They both end up worse off.
This whole messy situation, this trap they keep falling into, actually has a very famous name. And to really get our heads around it, we're going to need a super powerful concept from the economist toolkit called game theory. Game theory is basically the science of strategy. It's how we analyze situations where the outcome of your choice depends entirely on someone else's choice. And the most classic, most famous example of game theory in action is something called the prisoner's dilemma. So picture this. The infamous criminal duo Bonnie and Clyde get caught. The police don't have enough evidence for the big charges, so they get clever. They split them up, put them in separate interrogation rooms, and offer each of them the exact same deal. Snitch on your partner and we'll cut you a deal. Stay quiet and, well, you're taking a big risk. All right, now this is where it gets really interesting. Let's think this through from Bonnie's point of view. She has no idea what Clyde is doing in the other room. So she thinks, okay, scenario one, Clyde stays silent. My best move is to confess, because then I walk free. Scenario two, Clyde confesses. Well, my best move is still to confess, because then I only get 8 years instead of 20. You see? No matter what Clyde does, Bonnie is better off confessing. This is what we call a dominant strategy. And here is the heart of the dilemma. The best possible outcome for both of them as a team is if they both stay silent. They'd only get 1 year in prison each, but because they are both following their own rational self-interest, they both confess, and they both end up with 8 years. This predictable but worse outcome, where each player is making the best possible move they can given the other player's move, has a special name. It's called a Nash equilibrium. And boom, this brings us right back to our gas stations in Smallville. It is the exact same puzzle. The dominant strategy for 7-Eleven is to cheat and produce more. The dominant strategy for Casey's is also to cheat. So what do?
They both cheat, they both make $12,000 in profit, and they're both worse off than if they just found a way to cooperate and make $13,200 each. It's a business version of the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, so this isn't just some abstract theory for a textbook. I promise you, once you understand the logic of the prisoner's dilemma, you will start seeing it absolutely everywhere. Think about it. Why do companies like Coke and Pepsi spend billions on advertising? A lot of it just cancels each other out. They'd both be better off saving that money, but if one stops, the other gains a huge advantage. That's a prisoner's dilemma. Or think about international arms races. Both countries would be safer with fewer weapons, but neither dares to be the first to disarm. Even OPEC, the famous oil cartel, is constantly dealing with members who secretly pump more oil than they agreed to. It's the same logic over and over again. So, if it's so hard for these big companies to cooperate with each other, let's pause and ask, what does that mean for the rest of us? For you and me, the consumers? Is this whole mess actually a good thing for us? Well, the answer is surprisingly yes. The very same self-interest that leads these firms to betray each other is often a huge win for society. Why? Because when they compete instead of colluding, prices go down and quantities go up. It pushes the market closer to a competitive one, which is better for us. And this is exactly where public policy comes into play. Policymakers understand this dynamic perfectly. That's why we have laws like the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act. We call them antitrust laws, and their entire purpose is to make it illegal for these companies to get together and agree on prices or output. Essentially, the government is stepping in to make sure these companies stay rivals, because when they compete, we win. And let me tell you, this is not just some old history lesson. This debate is hotter than ever today. Just look at this quote. Top economists are fiercely debating how these laws, which were written over 100 years ago, should apply to the tech giants of today. It's one of the biggest economic questions of our time. So I'll leave you with a little puzzle to think about for yourself. The next time you see two competing grocery stores in the same town, and they're both open 24/7, ask yourself, are they really doing that because it's a smart, profitable plan for both of them? Or are they stuck in a trap? A Nash equilibrium where neither one dares to be the first to close at night, even if they're both losing money from midnight to 6 a.m. Something to think about. Thanks for listening.